recently picked up a slingshot. I know that I'm digressing back to my childhood as I get older because there's no other reason to make such a purchase. What I have learned in my research is that people actually use them for hunting. They also have competitions and make videos of just how good they are using them. Not exactly the kind of advertisement we were subject to when we were young. In my day, if you had a slingshot, you were no doubt up to no good, and if used, the stone was sooner or later destined to find an unsuspecting window at an abandoned house. Maybe. Hello, my name is Ken, and I want to welcome you back to Deep Waters. This podcast is brought to you by Applied Strength Ministry, where we believe working together in our strengths is the effect of working out the will and calling of God in our lives. So the title of this message is The Rocks Will Cry Out. So let me bring you along in the story. We shall fast backwards to a boy who was young and also had a slingshot, although back then the slingshot was actually slung, and its effectiveness depended on the power and accuracy of the slinger, and not so much on the sling itself. Today they have laser and infrared sights, and rubber bands for days. The bands are also rated for strength depending on what you want to use it for. Some of these things will sling at 300 feet per second, taking out any unsuspecting vermin. But what would it take to sink a stone so deep into the skull of a giant that it would kill him using a real slingshot? David was a real slingshotter, but of course his wasn't designed for hunting, as we know he had to deal with a lion and a bear with his bare hands. Yep, all day long. I'm not lying. We have all heard and read the story about how David defeated Goliath with the sling and shiny stone. But for this story, I want to open up a message that was hidden in plain sight. This is why it only took me 2 decades to first read about it in a book and then see it in the Bible. So in this story, which we will read about in a moment, we see that David picked up 5 stones to take out Goliath. One could have come up with the conclusion that by reading this story at the surface level, that David lacked faith to believe that God could indeed take out Goliath with just 1 stone. And by all accounts, one could think that David was hedging his bets and decided that a semi-automatic weapon would be a good choice, considering his opposition. No, but it begs the question as to why David picked up 5 stones, doesn't it? Comparatively speaking, it perhaps a little unfair to compare David to the father of faith, but in Genesis 22:5, we see pure faith in action. We see what we all aspire to achieve when operating in faith in and through our own lives. Abraham was instructed by God to sacrifice his only son. So off he went, and when his servants could go no further, Abraham stated to them, "Stay here, we will be right back." We is, and we was the landing strip for faith. Abraham was declaring that both he and his son would return back to that same spot and head home with the 2 others that Abraham brought with him. Now that's faith. But picking up 5 stones instead of just 1, well, we could assume that David wasn't at the same level that Abraham was, right? Genesis 22:5, and Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." But in my open ears and open eyes moment of discovery, I saw how David was acting in a prophetic gift in the same way that Abraham did, and maybe even more so. But you can decide if that statement is fair as we move through the story. 1 Samuel 17:40 states, "Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine." 1 Samuel 17:49, "Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. And he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth." Doesn't it say every knee will bow and every face will fall to the earth? Well, for sure the knee thing is true. So as an adult, the story is really uneventful. Yes, I get that we can refer to the story when we are facing giants in our life, and oftentimes we do. But we know that God is an efficiency expert and that David still has 4 stones in his stone sack. Well, what I missed for way too many years, and because of the condition of the church today, as I only take partial blame for my spiritual ignorance, is that David was making a prophetic declaration. David was already living like a king in that he not only took out the immediate threat, but also was prophetically considering the future threat. We are taught to make disciples of all the nations in Matthew. Impartation is the act of putting some element of what is on your life and depositing it into another person's life. We try and do this with our kids all the time, right? What is interesting here is that David was making disciples before Jesus had asked us to make disciples, because what David did at the battle was to develop and strengthen a faith and a belief in God that he would need to carry with him throughout the rest of his life in order to one day deposit the anointed prophetic word that he spoke in the remaining stones that he had picked up. It is possible that these stones were the first to cry out, "Hosanna to the highest." God was fighting for David before David transitioned into a warrior. God would need 5 stones in the hands of David, 1 for Goliath's forehead, and the other 4 for his brothers. You see, God wasn't just taking out Goliath, but he, as he is so well known for, was killing the Goliath line. Now it was up to David to make the disciples that would remain, and we know that David was a warrior who reproduced an army of warriors and mighty men, and it would be through them that the word would come to pass. 2 Samuel 21:22. When the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. Then Ishbi-Benob, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels, who was bearing a new sword, thought he could kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." In verse 18, it goes on to say, "Now it happened afterward that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Saph, who was one of the sons of the giant. Again there was war at Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jeri-O-Regim, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam." And just so you know, I'm having a real difficult time with all these names we no longer use. But that's okay. You get the story. So in verse 20 it goes on to say, "Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. So when he had defiled Israel, Jonathan the son of Shimei, David's brother, killed him." In verse 22 it states, "These 4 were born to the giant of Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servant." I don't know, to me sometimes it just sounds like there are some things that you're going to start in your generation and some things that your kids are going to finish in the next generation. So kids, pay attention. You might end up fighting the battle that your parents are now fighting. So in finishing, when you remember the story of David and Goliath as you face down your own giants, consider picking up enough stones to take out the whole multi-generational problem. When you pray for the entire mountain range to be tossed away and not just the one mountain. Is there anything too difficult for the Lord? Well, that's it for today. And so what do we learn? God speaks, waiting for someone to listen. Will it be you? It should be anyone who calls himself a Christian. To be a Christian and not to hear from God is likened to being a kid never hearing from your parents, who lived under the same roof as you. Remember, it's not what you find wrong with or disagree with regarding these messages, but from what you can take away from it. Together we can do more to impact the kingdom than if we work alone. Let's flip the script and kill, steal, and destroy the works of the enemy, and create space for the light of lights to shine through into people's lives. Plant a seed and click on the like and subscribe button. Let's build this ministry together. Thanks, and see you next time in Deep Water.